Today, I'm going to continue talking about the Bardo. There are 6 Bardos that are talked about. And very simply, Bardo means gap or between. So there are 3 Bardos that we can experience while we are alive. And then there are 3 Bardos that we experience through the dying process and rebirth. While we are alive, there is the Bardo between birth and death. And so we're familiar with this state. It's a state of constant change. And if you are highly realized, you understand that these appearances are more like magical illusions or dreams, that they have no real existence. We, of course, don't experience the Bardo of between birth and death in this way. We take it to be real. The remedy is, of course, to practice meditation and practice Mahamudra in particular, so that you can realize emptiness, or at least gain some type of certainty through examination that the appearances of this life are illusory and at least unreliable. The next Bardo is the dream state. The dream state is not real, but when we are dreaming, we take it as real. So there are dream yogas that you can practice and learn to realize while you're dreaming that it is not real. And this is a good way to practice also to prepare for the Bardos of Dying. Then there is the Bardo of Meditation. And this consists of being able to meditate in a non-dualistic fashion, that there is a gap, this between state, the gap between dualistic thinking and the return to dualistic thinking. Now, the 3 states of the Bardo that I am concentrating these teachings on are, first of all, the Bardo of Dying. And this very simply is the path of a clear light, the nature of our minds. And if through training we recognize it as Dharmakaya, we become enlightened. The second is the Bardo of being dead. And in this Bardo, we have an illusory body. And if we can realize that our body is really the Sambhogakaya, is the deity, then we are liberated. So the practice here is to meditate on deity visualization, on pure appearance, and to identify yourself completely with this appearance of the deity, that it is utterly unreal, yet absolutely vivid and pure. The third of these Bardos is approaching rebirth. And it is through this that leads to the path of being reborn in a physical body. But here, with training, we can choose our parents, and through that, choose the kind of upbringing we will receive, the kind of environment that we are born into. Quote, through the force of love and compassion and the force of your aspirations for appropriate birth, you are able to stop inferior or inappropriate birth and choose a birth which you can continue the path and be of benefit to others. This is from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's book, Bardo, the Interval of Possibility. So it is important while we are alive to practice to prepare for our death, which is inevitable and unavoidable, so that we have some ability to direct ourselves where we would like to go. So we need to recognize then the sensations that a dying person has, and the feeling of loss, the feeling of being in unfamiliar circumstances, and so forth. In Rinpoche's words, for this reason, we must develop an unwavering recognition of the absolute nature that will carry us through the dying transition, no matter what arises. So the way we gain this unwavering recognition is through practice, specifically through Mahamudra practice. You need to follow the instructions of your Lama. And the beginning of Mahamudra practice is doing Nundro, the 4 extraordinary foundations. What Nundro literally means is that which goes before Mahamudra practice. So Mahamudra practice is developing this ability to rest in our absolute nature, the Dharmakaya. It's called the child luminosity. And I will go into that later in this talk. So here is what happens as our body dies, that the elements one by one dissolve as we go through this dying process. First, the earth element dissolves into the water element. And at this point, you cannot support yourself anymore. The next stage is the water element dissolves into the fire element, or you could say the water element breaks down. At this point, our mouth and nose dries up, our eyes dry up. So there is this sensation of just being very, very dry. The third step is the fire element dissolves into the wind element. When this happens, the body's warmth withdraws from the limbs to the center, the heart center. The next stage is that the wind element dissolves into the space element. And at this point, you stop breathing. and the pulse stops. You are still conscious, and your consciousness is still in the body. Now, usually at this point, the mental processes go through a dissolution. It can happen earlier, it can start earlier, but usually it begins at this point. And so the first is appearance. And again, this can happen while you are still breathing. So what happens is appearances subside, they gradually become a bright uniform whiteness. And your mind becomes a little bit vague, kind of like it's described as mist or smoke. I think in today's medical language, they would talk about brain fog. So sometimes you can focus, sometimes you can't focus. You are just not seeing things, mentally not seeing things very clearly. At this point, all 33 forms of anger are suppressed. They're not purified, but they stop. So the next stage is increase or augmentation. And here that white light turns to red. The white light was brilliant, and now it becomes a brilliant red light. And our cognitive state is described as fireflies, which means that our cognition flashes on and off. Sometimes the mind is lucid, clear, and focused. Sometimes it's obscured. This kind of reminds me a bit of Alzheimer's, that this is what happens to a person with Alzheimer's, is sometimes they do have moments of clarity and recollection, and most of the time they don't. There may be absolutely no connection. I am just bringing this out. My mother had Alzheimer's, and this kind of reminded me of the way she was. So Rinpoche says, quote, all forms of desire, lust, attachment, cravings, hankering, any form of want, it all stops. So again, they are suppressed. They are not eliminated or purified. Rinpoche says that at this stage, some people can realize they are dying, that they recollect their lives, and they start to feel happy if they've had a good, satisfying life. He says that a person can even at this point have visions of their future birth and their future life. But not only a positive or a good future life, but also a bad rebirth. Of course, it all depends on karma. Now, at this point, the dying person's mind can be influenced or directed to a certain extent. So what is a good practice to do is to recite the mantras of the Buddhas, to recite the names of the Buddhas, recite the lineage of fathers and sons, the great gurus, and so forth. So if you can do this, it can help bring the dying person's mind to these objects that are very, very beneficial for them to reflect on, remember, recall, and so forth. Rinpoche says that it's good to do this right next to the person's ear, or even touching the person's ear. That at this point, it's good to remind them of their previous practice, to give them instructions, and so on. Now, at this point, Rinpoche says, is when it's good to do a poa, if you have been trained to do a poa for another person. Or if you are the dying person, have been trained, this is when you would do a poa, which is the ejection of consciousness. If there is no poa, or the poa is unsuccessful, this is what happens next. It's called attainment. And it is utter blackness. There's actually no appearance whatsoever. It is the final shutdown of the body, the physical process of living. And so the cognitive state is described as like a butter lamp in a vase, that there is no light escaping. It is just bare lucidity without any objects, with and no objects within the cognition. It's just blank. And at this point, the various varieties of bewilderment cease. Again, they are suppressed, they're not eliminated or purified. So we have desire eliminated, anger eliminated, and now bewilderment or stupidity eliminated. All our six consciousnesses at this point have dissolved. All appearances, all the objects of the six consciousnesses are gone. And this is a gradual process, starting with the first, which again is called the white path. This appearance where things become white. So it starts at that point. The five elements are dormant at this point. There is no obscuring factors. At this point, hallucinations can arise. People who have had been very mean and unkind can see terrifying hallucinations. People who have led virtuous lives can experience very pleasant environments and so forth. Whatever, it's not stable, it fluctuates, it changes from one thing to another, very much like a dream, and it doesn't last long. So now comes the moment of death. And this is how Rinpoche describes this moment. That first of all, the quote, original seeds, unquote, that caused you to be born in a physical body are still present in the central channel. You've got the white element, which is the male seed that you received from your father, and the red element, which is you get from your mother. And they're held in the central channel, the white seed being up at the top and the red seed being down at the bottom of the central channel. And they're kept in those places by our life wind. So the life wind withdraws into the heart center of the heart. We're talking about not the physical heart, but the heart center, like as in the deities' heart center. And so the red element arises to the heart, the white element descends towards the heart. And then at that moment, at that place, the all base consciousness, the life wind, quote, all of the potential cognitive functions, end quote, the red and the white elements, they all unite at that place. And this is the actual moment of death. At this point, the mind and the body separate. The body is dead, but the mind doesn't necessarily leave the body at this point. So what happens next is described this way, that the fundamental or ground clear light arises, frequently referred to Mother Luminosity. Rinpoche describes it as, this is like the experience of a boundless, clear, and cloudless sky. This is our true nature. This is our Buddha nature, our jhana, our yeshe, our primordial wisdom. There are many different names for it. And all beings in the six realms experience this at death. It's not unique to humans. Now, if you don't recognize this, then what happens is that you are stunned. And you kind of pass out. You lose consciousness for a certain period of time. And it's described as this period of time is the duration between one action and another action. You might say a gap. So there is a gap of unspecified duration that happens at this time when you lose consciousness, when your mind loses consciousness, when you're stunned, maybe like fainting. Now, if we have practiced, as I had mentioned earlier, if we have practiced, we have recognized what's called the child luminosity, or the child clear light. And we have not experienced the mother luminosity, but we have experienced something that is not nearly as intense, but is still very close to the mother luminosity. It takes, again, following the instructions of your Lama, practicing, and having a certain amount of realization. But through developing our faculties of mindfulness and alertness, we have a chance to recognize this ground clear light when it arises. It's a bit like through practice, we experience or have a glimpse of the child clear light, and it's like a photograph. And then when the mother clear light or luminosity arises, it's like seeing the person that is in the photograph. So with practice, you can gain recognition at this time. And with recognition, you are liberated into the Dharmakaya. Now, the characteristics of this meditative state that we want to cultivate are well-being, a feeling of physical well-being, regardless of how your body, how old it is, how healthy it is, and so forth. Just a feeling of well-being. Sometimes it's described as bliss. The second is the experience of lucidity, seeing things very, very clearly and precisely. And the third is non-conceptuality, having experience, but not getting conceptual about it. So we try to cultivate these experiences through various practices. In meditation, the way to do this is to do as little as possible rather than try to chase after it. They arise if we leave them alone, if we don't try to achieve anything, if we just let ourselves be without goal, without an agenda, without any reason other than to just do it and to do as little as possible. The less you do, the more your absolute nature comes to the surface. It is not something that you can create or recreate or hold on to. So the mother clear light has absolute well-being. It is utter and pure lucidity, just complete lucidity, not a glimpse of lucidity or some lucidity or some clarity, less obscuration. It is absolute, pure lucidity without any obscurations. And it is totally free of any thought or conceptuality. The problem is that this is so different from our normal mental state of being that we don't recognize it. And so we are stunned, and the opportunity to recognize it and be liberated into the Dharmakaya passes. So at that point, I've covered what happens at the time of death. My next talk will be talking about the Bardo that arises when you regain consciousness.